Great. Welcome everyone to the first Time to Talk on the Game Collective. So thank you all for joining us. And welcome to Harry. I think your last name is Alisavakis.
Yeah, it's pretty close.
Amazing. I didn't butcher that. That's great. So Harry is well known for the Technically Art posts on Twitter. And that's how we know each other, as well as his Discord server called Technically Speaking. So if you have any more tech art questions, be sure to drop down into his Discord channel at the end. Yes.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. So for the structure of this talk, we're going to have about an hour's worth of talk, which is very free flowing. And then we'll have Q&A at the end. So we have a live Q&A prepared for you all on Slido. If you've never used it, it's basically a way in which you can ask questions, and you can also upvote other people's questions, and then we will answer those at the end for you. So yeah, please do use your phone. I would recommend to use your phone, ask questions throughout, and then we will have a look through them. Okay, so off you go, Harry.
All right. Thank you. And thank you for hosting and for this glorious server. First off, I just want to say more personally, hi. Yeah, this is working all right. Hello. I won't have the camera on all the time, mostly for bandwidth reasons, and also because like the presentation stuff is on a lower screen, it will just look awkward. I just want to say hi. There is a bit of a structure to the presentation, but it is all very free form and free flowing. So feel free to drop any questions you have. Treat this stage chat as a Twitch chat, more or less. So comments, questions, feedback, anything, just throw it. And yeah, hopefully it will be an interesting talk. And now I will try and share my awkward bottom screen. Let's go. And all right. Hopefully you can see that. Just some confirmation on the chat. Yeah, all right. Let's go. So, welcome to this like kind of random, kind of on the spot talk about UVs, UV coordinates, texture coordinates. Actually, I won't use the term texture coordinates, and that's part of my gripe with this subject. So, here's the thing. This talk is gonna be basically kind of like a technical view on the subject of UV coordinates. It was actually sparked as I noticed that there are some mostly beginner 3D artists, but some other 3D artists as well that, basically use UVs just for texturing, which is basically their intended use. But I have a gripe with that because you can actually do so much more with UVs, and when you understand how they work, then you can really do some really cool stuff. So yeah, I'm gonna do like a little technical view of what UV coordinates actually are and how they work. We can talk a little bit about how you can manipulate them. This, by the way, would be kind of basic, but hopefully providing some background as to how the technical side is, then it will actually make more sense. So a lot of that stuff might be stuff you already know, but still. We're gonna talk a little bit about the shaping functions that we can use with UV coordinates, which are some pretty commonly used shader functions in general. We're gonna talk about other ways to sample textures, because this talk is about like the concept of UVs and whether or not we actually need UVs as we know them. All right, so yeah, we can also find other uses for the UVs, not just texture sampling. So yeah, there are gonna be lots of examples. I'm gonna switch softwares back and forth. So hopefully things will make sense. All right, so one of my bigger gripes, mostly with like blog posts and videos around 3D art and game development and all that, is that everybody mentions UVs are as coordinates used to sample textures. And I'm like, yeah, sure, that's what they were made for, or that's the most common use. But thinking just that kind of locks you out of a lot of cool and fun effects. So let's go like kind of lower level. UVs are actually vertex streams. You might have seen, if you use Unity, Unity is my main tool, by the way. But if you use Unity, you might have seen the term vertex streams in at least two places. One of them is in particle systems, and another is with like something called additional vertex streams for renderers. But they're basically vertex streams. What that means is that they're just per vertex data. That's all. They are actually just an arbitrary set of like 2 or up to 4 floating point numbers, or it can be even 1. Like it's very arbitrary. It's just a set of numbers, just floats. Sure, usually and mostly they are used for texture sampling. That's what they're most commonly used for. That's why they're referred to as texture coordinates, even in shader level. But still, not the main thing. That's the takeaway here. And let's start with like some demo stuff. All right. So here I'm with Blender, right? Assuming I can make like a little plane here, I can, for example, use another vertex stream, another type of per vertex data, which you all know is called Vertex Colors. Right, so I can do something like this and paint this, let's say black. These two edges, let's paint them black. We only have these 4 vertices, by the way, so, just these two are now painted black. The odd thing here, right, and that's the main takeaway here, is that while I have painted these two black and I left these two as white, we do get like this gray color in between, right? And that's basically, that also happens with like UVs. So, if we have like a little quad here, that I can definitely draw. All right. All right. We have our quad here, and we say that this is like the 0.0, and this is like 1.1. And we do know that this point here, this pixel here, basically, will have a UV coordinate of 0.5, 0, right? How do we know that? How does that happen, basically? And here I want to listen to your answers in the chat. Basically, I want to hear a very specific word about what happens to the value going from this vertex all the way to this vertex. How come when I only set the 0.0 and 1.1, I get 0.5? Yeah, Thomas has the right answer. It's interpolation. These kind of data get linearly interpolated from one vertex to another, and this way as well, and so on. And that's how we get this kind of gradient. It's easy to see with vertex colors because there are colors, and we can see that black going all the way to white, and we get like the gray in the middle. And that's what happens in the shader level as well. I'm gonna show you this classic thing that you probably have seen if you've ever gotten into like graphics in general. This is a basic description of a graphics render pipeline. I think this is specifically Vulkan. maybe? I'm not quite sure. No, I think it's not Vulkan. I think this is OpenGL, but it doesn't really matter because that's pretty common in pretty much all of the pipelines, DirectX, OpenGL, Vulkan, whatever. The main thing here is that we go from the vertex shaders or the vertex stage, where we have some functions that are happening in vertex level for each vertex, basically. And then we go all the way to the fragment shader, the fragment stage, or the pixel shader, which is what ends up on our screen. And while we only have data in our vertices, they get linearly interpolated in the fragment space, so we get this kind of gradient. I get a question here that if I sample the middle color in Blender, why is it not 0.5? It should be, but I'm not quite sure if there are some color space restrictions or some color space like differences here. But the core idea is that they are linearly interpolated, so the middle point should be 0.5. Maybe with colors there's something different going on, but numerically speaking, should be 0.5. So this pipeline is useful to remember because this is actually very much reflected into the shader pipeline as well. So if you use Unity or any other game engine pretty much, you might make your materials using a visual editor, like a node editor, like shader graph or the material editor in Unreal Engine, that kind of stuff. But there is this interesting structure in Unity shaders that actually makes sense if you know about this kind of data being interpolated. So hopefully you can see this. This is large enough so you can see. This is a very, very simple unlit shader. We don't have to go into the coding side of stuff or what all of those weird... Okay, text is clear, nice. Or all of those like weird notations and whatnot. But there is this clear structure that it's useful to focus on. So a shader, in all engines, but that's kind of abstracted if you use a node-based tool, you basically have like your vertex stage and your fragment stage. Those are the most common ones, the vertex shader and the fragment shader. There are some more. There are like the tessellation shaders and geometry shaders. Well, basically tessellation is a stage that's composed of the hull domain, hull and domain shader, but yeah, they are not as common. Vertex and fragment are the very, very common ones. And the job of the vertex shader is to get like the vertex data, the vertex streams, which could be like the position, the normal vectors, the UVs, all that stuff, and interpolate them in order to actually occupy the space that the mesh would occupy in the screen. That's what the rasterization stage is doing, basically. It's translating all the vertex data into screen data. And then we get onto the fragment stage where we now have like pixel information and we can change the color of the pixel that ends up on the screen. These properties here, which here are, they are in like a struct object, but they might as well be alone. These are actually called interpolators. You can find them in some blogs and whatnot. You can find that they are called interpolators. And they are very much called that because their job is to interpolate the data from the vertex stage to the pixel stage. And that's essentially why we end up having this kind of gradient, while we only really set that data on a vertex level. This, you might also have seen it kind of reflect in shader graph as well, because there is this thing that you can add to the vertex group here, which are called custom interpolators. And that's if you want to basically add some more data on the per vertex level and have them spread over in the fragment shader. This is kind of like technical jargon, but it's important to understand that the UV coordinates are nothing more than just like per vertex data that just gets spread over from one vertex to another. That's the takeaway here, and that's all you need to know. No, don't worry about like the shader coding jargon and all that. We probably won't even see that code anymore. So, all right. This gradient color is basically what you're more familiar with when we're talking about UVs. Because it's basically a visual representation of the UV spectrum. When we use UVs conventionally, we basically do exactly this. This is what happens when we do texture sampling. We grab the coordinate of the UVs. So bottom left corner is 0.0. And we then get the pixel in that area on our texture. So bottom left corner. Same goes for top right corner, like it's 1.1. And again, this is all like basically a gradient, an interpolated gradient in two axes. And that's how we get each pixel. So if we were to like go pixel by pixel, it would be an easy way to understand that, you know, like this pixel here would correspond to this pixel here. It's very much a one-to-one translation. When we say texture mapping, for example, it's very much like a mapping of values, basically matching the values between them, the coordinates of our UVs and the coordinates of the texture. This is what you already know, probably. I mean, if you've used any sort of materials or 3D anything, you probably know that this is like the main use for UVs. However, it's very useful to like break it down a bit more. So this representation of UVs is nothing more than this. Two gradients, two interpolating values going from 0, which would be black, to 1, which would be white. We have one of these going from 0 to 1 on the x-axis, on the horizontal axis, or the u-axis, whatever you want to use, which we could assign to a red color channel. And we also get that this vertical gradient going from 0 to 1 again, from the bottom to the top, which corresponds to the y-axis or the v-axis or the green color channel. Again, the main thing here is that because textures and images are in principle two-dimensional, we pretty much want a two-dimensional vector, a two-dimensional set of coordinates to map from our UVs to the texture. So this is what we get here, a horizontal axis and a vertical axis. And a horizontal value interpolating from 0 to 1 and the vertical one. But the thing is, again, this is an interpolating value going from 0 to 1. This can be very much be considered as just a linear value going from 0 to 1. And you can assume that for both axes. But, you know, let's just let's kind of break it down and just stay on the one axis. That means that we can, whatever math we can think of that we can do on a 0 on a value going from 0 to 1, we can pretty much assign to our UV values, either to both channels or just the one. And I've said this before, but basically, if you want to do anything cool with shaders, it all starts with a value going from 0 to 1. That's where it starts, literally. Like, hell, if you open up like a shader toy and you, like, the default one would just be more or less like this texture, like a UV texture. And I don't know if you see, if you have seen what people have made on shader toy. It's crazy. Like, I think I've seen more than one instances where people have remade Doom in a shader toy. So that's like just a shader. In case you don't know about shader toy, you cannot really load any textures or assets or anything. It has just a couple of built-in noises, and then it's all just shader. So that's kind of crazy. Yeah, as Specs mentioned, and I will mention that later on as well. In terms of graphics and game development in general, you can interchangeably think of colors as numbers and numbers as vectors and vectors as set of numbers or directions or positions or anything. So everything is numbers and data, and you can do anything you want with them. So whatever math applies to like simple 0 to 1 values, then you can apply that to UVs. So let's check out some cool math. All right. So, all right. I have here a little quad with this test shader graph shader. And I can use this little kitten texture here. All right. I can just output the color. There we have it. It's awesome. So, actually, this material is what I want. All right. We have all more or less just changed the tiling on the texture, especially if it's like a tiling texture, right? So, actually, I am going to make it like this, like an input, and plug it in here. And I'm also going to use tiling and offset so that I can change that. All right. So I can make this be like 2 by 2. So 4 kittens. Nice. Why do we get 4 kittens though? Like, I changed the tiling, but what does changing the tiling actually do? So this, if I left it 1 and 1, I might as well get this exact same result by multiplying my UVs. So I can get my UV coordinates here, multiply them by 2, and I get the same result. Why? Why does the tiling kind of works like a multiply? Here's where math comes in. All right. So I have this little graph toy. Yeah, math. Be prepared for some math. So this is Graph Toy. It's a very useful little site made by the creator of Shader Toy, where you can basically try out math, but with like shader functions, which is pretty cool. Here I just have like a value going from 0 to 1. That's, easy, classic. And you can assume that this basically corresponds to our texture. to, let me open this up, like this 0 to 1. Again, we're just in one axis right now, but you can assume that whatever I do in one axis applies to both of them. If I'm going way too fast, let me know, but I promise there is a point to all of this. All right, so again, UVs are kind of arbitrary. We can manipulate them and whatnot, but we cannot really manipulate the way that images work, right? I mean, it is a linear relationship. Like it starts 0 here, it goes all the way to 1 here. That we cannot change. We can only really change our UVs. So I am going to leave this function as it is, and I'm going to make another one that corresponds to our UVs. It's gonna look, well, the same as this one, because it's, again, that's when our UVs are unmodified. It's a one-to-one same thing. But here is what happens when I multiply my UVs. Actually, I'm not gonna saturate that. I'm just gonna say 2 multiplied by x. You'll see that I now have basically UVs that are exceeding the range of my image, because the UVs can go outside the 0 to 1 range. All right, we know that, but the image is what it is. It doesn't really go outside 1. It doesn't have any more image. That's the image. We're out of image right now. Like, especially at this exact point here, when x is 0.5, this is where we run out of image. So how do Unity and like other game engines, how do they handle that? Well, you probably know that if you select a texture in Unity or again any other game engine, you have some options for the wrap mode. And here it says repeat. If I change that to clump, I don't have now 4 kittens, I only have the 1. Yeah, I just clumped the kitten. What are you gonna do about it? But what basically Unity does when I say, hey, repeat these UVs, is say, okay, I'm going to apply fract on this. The fract method in the shaders, basically, it's called fract in GLSL, but it's just frac in any other language. It's weird, I know. Anyway, but what it does is just get the fractional part of a floating point number. So it repeats by going from 0 to 0.999 and then again 0 and so on and so forth. So you see that now I have one line basically going from 0 to 1 and then another. So I just multiply my domain by 2. I basically make my domain double. And this is what makes the cat repeat. And I can actually make a proof, like I can prove that by setting the wrapping mode back to clump. But now I can actually change my shader to use this exact function. It's called fraction in shader graph. You can actually see that working in shader graph. It divided my UVs. And now, boom. Sorry, I was just reading the comments. So yeah, for example, if you have like a texture that for some important reason has a wrap mode set to clump, but you do need it to repeat in some cases, and you don't have to change the wrap mode. you can just adjust your UVs. That's how you make your UVs tile. And we can go the other way around. So if I set that to be repeat, instead of using the fraction thing here, I can use a clump on my UVs and make them just go from 0 to 1. I don't know why I don't have a preview here. Let's see. Okay, still works. So when we actually change the tiling, something that it's pretty common to do with a material in any game engine, what you essentially do is multiply or divide your UV coordinates. So you can sample the texture in a different way. And actually you can get more creative. And you can actually see that relation of math and UVs very easily. So this makes the texture just repeat, going from 0 to 1, and then falls right back to 0 and 1 and so forth. This is not very smooth though. We can make it kind of smooth by making it essentially mirror itself. And we can do that directly in the shader. We can do that through the wrap mode, but here's how we can do that directly in the shader, by essentially manipulating the values of our UVs. So I can get the fractional part of X. All right. Let's multiply that again. I can now subtract 0.5 and take the absolute value of that. Bear with me. Now you can see this is actually a triangle wave. One problem is it only goes up to 0.5, but we can fix that by multiplying by 2. All right, so now you can see I don't have that hard cutoff that I had before, which is what actually made my my kittens have this hard seam here, right? This is not very nice. I mean, if your texture is tileable, then you don't see that seam, but I might actually not want that seam in any case. This is how I could get a mirroring effect. So I will actually try and use this exact formula in my UVs. And here I have like my the fraction of my UVs, but I want to subtract 0.5. All right, let's do that. 0.5 and 0.5. Awesome. And I can take the absolute value of that. There is an absolute node, so getting that, praise the absolute. And now I can multiply that by 2. All right, and now if I use these UVs, mirrored kittens. And I mean, you can visualize that by like basically using the UVs as colors. So let's do that. If I just output the UVs themselves, we see this. It is a mirrored pattern. So if I actually just see the X value, that might make things a bit clearer. You'll see what's going on here. It goes from 1 to 0, from 0 to 1, 1 to 0, 0 to 1. This is exactly this function. And you can also see this kind of error, if you want to call it that, where it starts from 1 instead of 0. I didn't care really because it's still like tiling and mirroring and whatnot. But, you know, it starts from 1, going to 0, going back to 1, 0, and then 1. Exactly this. I'm glad this is slowly making sense. There is 8 kittens now. That is true, because you see that this actually became a bit more dense. We have like one texture here, one texture here, one texture here, and one texture here. If I remove the 2, then I will get one texture here, one texture here, so just 2 kittens. And just to test out this theory, if I remove this multiply, or basically set it to 1, boom, 4 kittens. So yeah, the idea is pretty much that any one of the 2 components of UV coordinates can be treated as this kind of interpolated value going from 0 all the way to 1. And then you can manipulate it to whatever you want. Hell, I mean, you can use a sine node. Ooh, whoa. Is there a... Okay, let's do a double pi. Come on. There we go. And we can make the UVs look like that. I mean, it will look a bit funky, but you know what? Let's do it. Why not? We have the UVs here, multiply by tau. That's 2 times pi, by the way. And also, it's a Greek letter. We don't call it tau. It's just called tough. Kind of like tough luck. But everybody calls it tau. But it's just tough. Yeah. And I can get like a sine node here. And again, do this. Basically, this 0.5 plus 0.5, this is just to remap it to go from minus 1 range and go to 0 to 1 range. So remapping this, there we go. And these UVs will probably look a bit funky. Yeah, they do look a bit funky. But they're still mirroring, right? You can see that. It's because, you know, it's not a very linear relation. So you can see that it's looking a bit weird. You can also see that it's actually starting from 0.5. And that's why the kitten is a bit displaced. Yeah, unfazed kittens. And finally, you can also use other very useful shaping functions that you could use like with any value. You can use them with UVs. I mean, that's actually much more straightforward than whatever biblically accurate kitten this is. So let me just actually remove all of that. All right. Okay, back to normal kitten. All right. So because because we have this kind of gradient here, again, it's a value going from 0 to 1. That means that we can use something like a step node to threshold our UVs. That's probably pretty straightforward, right? Like I can split my UVs and do like a threshold on the x-axis and make it so that I have like 1 or white on the right side and black on the left side, because I use like this step function. In case you don't know, step just takes a value here, this in value, and it returns 1 if it's larger or equal, I think, to the edge value, and 0 if it's less than that. That's it. It's just a little branch thing. And while this looks pretty straightforward, it can be actually pretty useful for a bunch of effects. So think, for example, that you want to have vertex displacement, let's say wind. You want to have like some windy vertex motion on your mesh, but only on specific parts. Then you could, for example, have those parts be on the right side of your UVs. Literally just, unwrapping your mesh and having like, I don't know, I'm doing random things now, but yeah, basically you could have like this one, I mean, it's connected, whatever. But if it was disconnected, you could have like some parts on one side of your UV spectrums and other parts on another side of your UV spectrum. And then you could use functions like this to mask them out. And you could use that, for example, to have some areas in your model that could be recolored, or they could use a different set of textures. Hell, if you use UDIMs, which I'm not really very familiar with, but if you use UDIMs, these basically cover a whole spectrum of UVs, but they are like offset, like a second square here. So that means that it starts from 1.0, let's say, because it could be here, and it goes all the way to 2.1. You could also divide those segments of your UVs and understand which, basically get which part of your UDIMs you want in the shader. So this kind of manipulation with the UV data is extremely useful because you can do a bunch of dynamic effects or masking effects in the shader. And it's something very handy to know because your technical artists can ask you, if you're like the 3D artist, they can ask you to put like one segment of the model in one side of your UVs so they can be masked in a procedural way. That's the takeaway from here. Going back to the slideshow. All right. Yeah, so again, like the main takeaway here is UVs are just data going from 0 to 1. They can be treated as a math function, a simple linear math function going from 0 to 1, and then you can manipulate it as such. That's done. So yeah, you can use the frac, as I mentioned, or the clamp to adjust the wrapping. You can do some masking using step or smooth step. I didn't show smooth step, but basically smooth step is also a thresholding function that also gives you like a little gradient in between two threshold values. There is also a question asking if we can bypass the 4 UV map limit in game engines, or should we prioritize the 4 most important things to control from UVs? So that's a good question. I forgot to mention that in pretty much all editing software, 3D editing software, you can have like more than just one UV map. You can actually have up to 8. Some game engines restrict that, and you can only really use 4. But I'm not sure about Unreal. I cannot speak about Unreal. But Unity actually doesn't really restrict you. Almost, kinda. It's this annoying thing about shader graph actually, which only gives you access to these 4 UV channels, but the mesh can actually have up to 8 UV channels. And if you actually use 100 in shader, you can go crazy and be like UV. Well, this is UV 0. All right, so this is UV 1, text code 1. Let's go 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You can do that in 100 shaders. Unity doesn't actually restrict the actual usage of more than 4 UV channels, but shader graph UI does, which is annoying. But again, I cannot speak for Unreal Engine or any other engines. Yeah. Other than that, if the other engines, or basically you're in any way restricted to only use the 4 UV maps, then I guess you can prioritize. In most cases, you really won't really need more than 4 UV sets, even with any extra data that you might add to them. If you need more than them, then more than 4, then I don't know. There is this interesting thing though, and this actually sent me on a tangent, but I think it's worth mentioning. So Blender, when you unwrap, a model, you get these UVs, which are they're basically a set of 2D coordinates, right? Going from 0.0 to 1.1. But here's the thing. I don't know if you noticed, but getting the UVs in Unity gives you a 4-dimensional vector. Not a 2-dimensional vector, a 4-dimensional vector. So this is also another annoying thing. Vertex streams can be up to 4 dimensions. Blender and also other 3D modeling software, they're like, you know what? Why would you need 4 dimensions to unwrap a model? You only really want to map a texture, and that's 2 dimensions. So why do you want the other 2? Doesn't make sense. So Blender just doesn't give them to you. But you could have them. So here's a thing you can do is that you could potentially use there is this thing in Unity called asset post-processor, which basically is a little script that that can be triggered when you import a type of object, like a model. And you can then basically read all the 8 channels that it's brought from the software, from Blender, let's say. It can actually read all of those channels, and then it can rearrange them so that they can be packed more efficiently, and then use only 4 UV channels. So, yeah. I went a bit on a tangent there, and I just saw the time, so let's move on. Another classic thing you can do with UVs, I didn't show it, but you probably know that. This is how distortion works. You just modify the UV domain. So just like these 0 to 1 values, you just modify that with math and with other textures, and then when you use it to sample a texture, that texture is also distorted. The takeaway here is that if you can do some cool stuff with math, then it can work with UVs, because UVs are just numbers. Do we actually need UVs though? Like, can we do without them? Well, there are alternative texture sampling methods. You probably have heard of them. You probably have heard of triplanar sampling, which could also be thought of as biplanar or just planar if you only used like 1, 2, or 3 sets of planes. That makes sense. You can do screen space texturing. So you don't use UVs there, you just use the screen space texture, and you get this very disorienting, kind of dizzying effect where you have a texture that's sampled based on the on what the camera sees at that point, which can be kind of cheesy, but it can also look good if used properly. So what can we actually use to sample a texture? Can we potentially make our own UVs? Like, not just use other data, but basically use other data to remake UVs. Do UVs have to actually be like actual UVs? All right, here's a weird demo type. All right, so let's bring back the kitten. Right now we're using our UVs. You can see that they're perfectly mapped on our quad. The kitten is back. Yeah. I can, instead of use UVs, I might as well use basically a planar approach, a world space planar mapping. That would be getting the position of the mesh in world space, only using one plane. So that would be, let's say, the X and Y in this case. So I'm going to use a swizzle node, grab the X and Y here, and use that as UVs. And now, wait. All right. Now you can see that the kitten is steadily mapped in world space. All right. And why is that the case? Because I can very much actually output this value, and we'll see that this looks weird. But if I actually do a frac here, and that's the key. If I do a frac here, boom, the UVs are back. We can still see this kind of UV gradient. So yeah, this is how world space planar works. And the triplanar is basically this, but 3 times, each one for each plane. We can do that with screen position as well, as I mentioned. I might get a bit over time. Let me know if that's a problem. But yeah, here this is screen space stuff. So now you can see that the kitten is actually mapped in the whole range of my scene. And it basically, the quad acts like a window to that. And again, I can just output this here, and we can see that it's the UV gradient again, mapped on my screen. Like this is 0.0, this is 1.1, and yeah, this is it. So both of these approaches, though, have this annoying issue where, it's very jarring. Planar kind of works. Let me do. Planar kind of works. All right. It stays put, but if my quad moves, then it's still pretty jarring. So what can we do? What could be done? Well, I mean, we might as well make our own UVs. Let's see what other data we have. All right, let's ignore the fact that we have UV coordinates for now. We have other set of data as well. We have, for example, our object space position. Right? Let's output that. Let's see how that looks. Quite sure what this distortion is, to be honest, but you know what? We do get some values here. Okay, actually this color is a bit weird. I'm not quite sure what this is. Oh, wait. I think it has to do with like some post-processing stuff. Yeah, wow, what the heck, Unity. All right. This is the correct thing. It actually looks pretty similar to the UV thing we want, but it's not quite there. Actually, this part we want is only this quadrant. And this makes a lot of sense because we know, and again, this is a play on the things we do know, right? So we know that the quad, the unity quad, if I can draw a line, the unity quad is like one square unit. All right, like this is one and this is one. Cool. So because it has its center here, it's very normal to assume that the object space coordinates for this vertex are 0.5, 0.5, and because this is a 3D model, we do have a third component. But it's 0 because it's a flat quad. This could be 0.5, minus 0.5, minus 0.5, and again 0. And again, this is 0.5, minus 0.5, 0. And minus 0.5, 0.5, 0. We can assume that because, this is 1. This has a length of 1. This is the center, which is at 0.0.0. Again, this is object space coordinates, right? So that means that I know exactly what values we have at each corner. So we can manipulate those. We want, instead of these values, we want instead to be going from 0.0 to 1.1. Sorry, not comma, 1,1. I'm saying point all the time. Anyway, so we can just remap those more or less. And if I multiply these values by 2, then this is going from -1, minus 1 to 1,1. But again, why is the bottom left not 0.0? Because these are not UVs. These are object space coordinates. These are the positions of each vertex. Right? You can see this is position, the object space position. All right? So this is why this is minus 0.5, because the center is here at the center of the quad. All right. I'm glad that made sense. So if now I do basically a remap node and make it go from -1,1 to 0,1, this is what we want. And we more or less nuke the third channel because it's kind of confusing us right now. So, sorry, split. We only really want the X and Y. And if I output those, boom. We got, we got UVs back. So changing the pivot will change 0.0. Yeah, exactly. This is very much dependent on where the pivot is. If the pivot is not at the point we assume it is, so the center, then this doesn't work. We are working based on very specific assumptions and very specific given information. So since I have that here, I can very much just use it as my UVs. And the kitten is back. But do note that I'm not using any UV coordinates here. I don't use the mesh UV coordinates. I use the object space position of the mesh, which I know how is structured. Sure, it works for this quad. It wouldn't work for a sphere or a cube. I mean, maybe for a cube, it could be a bit easier because again, we can kind of get where each vertex is, so we can kind of recreate them in a similar way. It's very case specific, but we can do it. And I can sample a texture without UVs. And the other thing, okay, I'm gonna run out of time, but what happens if I scale the quad? It works. Same as rotation as well. Because these are object space values. They're not world space. So whatever happens to the transform of the quad gets reflected on the position in object space as well. And because I'm using those to get UVs, they also reflect those changes. And also, do I actually need UVs to sample a texture? No. The way the textures get sampled is using some 2D coordinates going from 0 to 1. Even they might not even go from 0 to 1. It's just like two 2D coordinates. I can add like a simple float 2 here. I can add a 0.5 here. I'm just gonna get a single color because I'm just providing a single coordinate. But the thing is, I can use a noise texture. Why not? Well, not that, but like a gradient noise. Yeah, there we go. I can use that, and you can basically assume that the X component of the UV is this weird, mush of values, but it is still there. It still works with the same sampling way. It actually makes a lot more sense if I don't use the kitten texture and I actually use, let's see. Come on, Unity. All right. I have a bunch of gradient textures here. All right. Yeah, this makes more sense. This is essentially gradient mapping. This is how the gradient mapping in Photoshop works. It takes grayscale value and uses that to sample a linear gradient like this. Wherever the value is black, so closer to 0, it will reflect the leftmost color of the gradient. Right? This is also how toon shading works with like a toon ramp, but instead of like a noise texture for the input of the toon ramp, you instead get the N.L, the diffuse lighting, which again is a gradient. So I'm gonna do this like very, very, very quick here. Don't ask me why, but I have to negate these. Dot. All right. Yeah, sure. And if I make this into a sphere, boom. I get the diffuse color from lighting, and I use that as UVs essentially for my gradient texture. And again, hell, what if this was a kitten? Well, that's looking weird. It's not really easy to understand what's going on here. It's more, it makes more sense with the gradient because we only have like the one axis and we can easily see the one-to-one correspondence from left or 0 or black to right or 1 or white. If you step that, will that turn into cell shader? Absolutely. Yeah, shell. Boom, posterize. There's a posterized node right here. Use that as a UV. Boom, cell shading. But this was actually a great question because this like got you into the process of thinking what would happen if I changed that value, and then you figured that it would lead to cell shading. So hopefully I did something right. This was a weird stuff. So again, would I have to pass each slide? Yeah, that's a shader graph thing. I'm not gonna get into that right now. You can do that with a handwritten shader. So yeah, you can use object position to sample a texture. We did that. We can use world position, planar, biplanar, triplanar. You can do that. Screen position. You can use other textures. You know what? I'm gonna do something extremely stupid. Bear with me. I have this texture of the UV gradient. I can use that as my UVs, and you know what? Quad, and let's bring back the kitten. It's still there. It's the same thing, but if you notice, what I'm plugging here at the UVs is an image of the UVs, which is sampled using the actual UV coordinates. But you know what? We could do this thing with the object space, and it still works. So no UVs here whatsoever. I just use object space position to sample a texture that has this kind of UV gradient and use the values from that texture as a guide to sample another texture. This is extremely stupid, but it works because of the reasons we mentioned, because it's just the gradient, just the values going from 0 to 1. So yeah, you can use other textures. You can use the diffuse or specular lighting factors to get like a tune ramp and make cell shading. Anything and everything can be used as an input to sample a texture as long as it interpolates from 0 to 1. Or I mean, even if it doesn't change values in any way, then you just get a single pixel because it's a constant value. But you want that to fluctuate between 0 to 1 or between any value, because if it interpolates from one value to another, then it can be made to interpolate from 0 to 1, and then you can use it as UVs or as basically a sampling input for any texture. This is basically what sparked the idea for this talk from omr.io, who's in the chat now, which is this kind of process of sampling different PBR values and color values based on a noisy gradient and the material ID. So if you notice, if it's visible here in the presentation, like the material ID, like these grayscale values are used as the Y component of the UV coordinates, and this grungy gradient is used as the X component of the UVs. And that's how one could get like some different colors and some different PBR values based on these two values. They're not quite UVs. They're not actually UVs at all. They're just grayscale values. But they range from 0 to 1 and therefore can be used to sample these textures. Yeah, and as we saw, we can rebuild UVs. We have the technology. You can use other coordinates like the object space coordinates. Chill, you know what? If you don't use normal mapping, use the tangent vectors. Why not? They're just per vertex data. You can use that. You can use other data streams. I forgot to do that, but if I go here and you know what? I'm not gonna do it because I'm running out of time. But basically, I could paint the one vertex as black, the other vertex as yellow at the top right corner, and basically recreate this UV gradient in the vertex colors, and then I could use the vertex colors as UVs. Again. Heck, use textures like I did. There is a bit asterisk here. Textures, when you put them in a game engine, the game engine is like, oh, you want me to apply like compression and maps and change the color space and use gamma correction and all that. Yeah, if you want to use a texture like this stupid example I showed before, you don't want any of these on your supposed coordinate texture. You want it clean data. But yeah, you probably wouldn't have to do that, but you know, you can. The important thing is to understand that you can do that. And yeah, UVs are, again, just arbitrary numbers. They're just a set of arbitrary floating point numbers. Sorry. Yeah. The cool thing is they provide per vertex data storage. So you can have one shader, one material for multiple meshes, and the only difference can be stored in their actual per vertex data, so in their UVs or in any other vertex streams. I got a question. Some 3D programs have UVWs. I have not heard of those. It sounds like it is just 3D vectors instead of 2. But I have no idea of the context, so I can't say for sure. You can use UVs for masking, as I mentioned. Like you can put like a set of the UVs in one side, so you can easily mask it in shader. You can do cool effects like pivot baking. So let's go over some mind-blowing stuff. I have here, I won't recreate it, but trust me on this. I have this fractured sphere here. It's basically just a sphere, and I used the cell fracture plugin in Blender. And I used a little technique inside Blender. I have this little tool that I made, but it's actually easy to do as well. I have a link at the end of the presentation to bake the center of each fragment of this sphere. Again, this is one mesh. I'm not cheating. This is just one mesh. But I stored the center of each segment into the UV channels. You can actually see how that looks. If I check the UV1 channel, oh, you actually cannot do that because they're singular points, so they're not shown on the preview here. You have to trust me on that. So I can do this little thing here where I have a float I call collapse here, and I can interpolate between my actual object space position and this pivot thing. This is a subgraph. I can show it to you. Let me use this. There we go. Without the kitten, sorry. Oh, and I have to plug that here. Okay, that makes sense. And boom. I have control. Basically, I have each individual pivot of this fractured mesh stored in the UVs. The simplest thing I can do is this kind of collapsing thing. You know what? Let me make it lit so you can see it better. Come on. Yeah, so lit. All right. The simplest thing I can do is this collapse effect. This is the first thing I do in these shaders to make sure that my pivot baking worked. But you can do so much more with that. You basically know how where each piece is. So yeah, Is this what UVN stands for in Maya when you move vertices using the normals? Oh, I have no idea. I have no idea. I might need the context for that. So yeah, again, this is all stored in the UVs, and I can actually show you this little subgraph. All it does is use the UV1 and UV2 channels to create a three-dimensional vector. The reason I have to negate it is because of axis conversion between Blender and Unity, but it works. So that's cool. Another really cool thing is mesh flipbooks. Have you heard about those? I mean, you probably know about flipbooks. These are, you know, like basically textures that you can switch for and you get an animation. But mesh flipbooks are actually pretty fun because they are just like a bunch of meshes put together. And I have made their UVs, this you can see, into these lines here. They're equal distance from one another. And I have a little shader here, there we go, that basically just reveals one at a time with like a scrolling kind of segment. So that's a very classic way of doing some stylized kind of lightning VFX, for example. And the final thing I have to show, and damn, I'm running out of time. But yeah, final really cool thing. There is this technique by Pontus Carlson. Again, I'll have the link in the end of the presentation, where basically they make a tree using billboards from the meshes. Yeah, I know. I've been saying that. I know. I actually have to to get out of the house pretty soon. But yeah. So I'm gonna try and make this as fast as I can. Let's go. So let's say I have this mesh. I can unwrap each individual face like this. It's a very bad way to unwrap things, and 3D artists in the chat are probably going to be furious with me, but bear with me. I'm going to export these. All right. I call this tree sphere because this effect is mostly for a very cool tree trick, basically. So I'm gonna add this my test SG shader here. I don't need the pivot baking anymore, so I'm gonna remove that. So if I output my UVs here, let's see how this looks. It looks like this, right? Because its face, its quad has like its own UVs. It might not work well because of the triangles here, but bear with me. It's also important to keep this mesh flat shaded, because otherwise I could not do what I'm about to do. So you can think of this UV's coordinate also as a vector, right? Because you more or less have like this is a 0.0 and this is 1, 1. So you can get a vector going towards that direction. If, however, we remap those UVs we can get something like the quad we had before. All right, and this could be still 1, 1. This could be minus 1, minus 1. So the center would be here, and you can think of its UV coordinate as a vector going outwards. If that makes sense. I'm saying it a bit rushed now, but if you see the video, it will make some more sense. So let's remap those UV coordinates. 0, 1, minus 1, 1. All right. So it's looking like this. All right, cool. So what if I modify my vertices along those modified UVs? I normalize them just to keep the distance consistent. But if I also multiply with a random number, I'm gonna use this collapse float for that real quick. This is what happens. This is kind of weird, actually. I'm not quite sure why it's rotating like that. Maybe something to do with the way I interrupted because it was quite fast. But the idea is that you can... oh, I think it's probably because of the normalize. Maybe I shouldn't normalize that. Come on. Come on. No, still. Anyway, but the idea is that you can essentially extrude the different faces from the sphere, and then you can make each plane be a billboard, and you can have really fluffy trees with like this kind of very weird but fun UV manipulation. Just going back to sum up the presentation, long story short, you don't need UVs to sample a texture. We saw that. You don't have to sample a texture with your UVs. You can use any other input to sample textures. Basically, UVs are just arbitrary sets of per vertex data. They're just number. You can use any other data to sample textures. I pretty much kind of said that. Nothing matters. Nothing at all. So, you know, at the very end, the real UVs are the friends we made along the way. It doesn't matter. UVs are used as a convention, but really, honestly, doesn't matter. And now I have a confession to make. I lied. Obviously, and I think people already mentioned that, and you probably already understood that, this isn't really a talk about UVs. This really was an intro to technical art. Because, you know, like a couple of technical art tenets that I like to think of as tenets for technical art, at least, is that, you know, what I mentioned, everything is data. Data can be shaped to fit your needs. That's it. That's more or less the core of tech art. And also something that applies to technical art a lot, but to so many other areas as well. Creativity comes from taking concepts out of their original context. That will give you creative solutions to your problems, and that's a big part of technical art as well. Just, you know, when you start thinking that UVs are not just for textures, then you can do some pretty cool stuff. So, thank you. Sorry for getting way late. These are some links. I can post them somewhere as well. And yeah, these are the links for the questions. There are some questions that I can now answer.
Amazing. Well done, Harry.
Thank you.
You got there in the end.
In the end, yeah. And I have like maybe 10 minutes to answer any questions because I really have to run after that. Yeah. Yeah, just seeing them now. How would you? One question is how could I pass the actor location to the UVs to use as a blue channel for depth? Parallax type idea. That wouldn't make a lot of sense because the actor location, because that's the location, if we're talking about world space, is something that is determined after the mesh, the model has been added into the engine and into the scene. So that's not really a piece of data that you could bake into a mesh. You could do that dynamically, but it wouldn't make a lot of sense, and it would also be kind of expensive because you could basically be writing on all the vertices on runtime. And you might as well hold that kind of data into just like a material property that you just assign to. And yeah, the other question was that regarding the packing extra data into the remaining UV channels, I assume that would be more performant than using 2 channels of Vertex Color. Actually, I'm not quite sure if Unity or other game engines can read more than 1 channel of Vertex Color. I might be very wrong on that. But I'm not sure if it would be more or less performant because they would still be like float 4 vectors per vertex. So it's kind of this, if there's no like precision differences, like having like half point floating numbers instead of like floats, then it might be better. But if it's still like a 4-dimensional vector of floating points, it's the same. It doesn't matter if it's Vertex Color or UVs. That's also a thing. It doesn't matter. Normals are also like 3-dimensional vectors, and they are like normalized directions. But you could still just bake colors in them if you're not going to use them for lighting. Just numbers. What if the actor pivot was used as a single coordinate to compare? If it was an actor pivot, how would it be a single coordinate? It would still have to be kind of like 3-dimensional or 2-dimensional at the very least. But still, because the pivot, if you're talking about the object space pivot, then you don't really need to bake that into anything because it's that it's 0.0.0. But if it's a world space pivot, then that's determined after you put the mesh into the scene. So why bake something that's inherently real-time, runtime, basically. I use UV0 for textures and UV1 for light maps. Yeah, that's actually a convention. That's actually a good thing to mention. That's a convention that's used in many engines, if I'm not mistaken, and Unity does that as well. And the thing is that it does that without asking you. So you might have a UV1 set that you might actually want to use for something different than light maps, and Unity will just hijack that and try and put light maps on there. So yeah, that's something to think about.
All right. I do think there's one more question. I'm not sure if you've answered this. Some 3D programs have UVWs. What is that? Is it just 3D vectors instead of 2D?
Yeah, I tried to answer that, but honestly, I don't know because I haven't seen that in any context. I would assume that it could be a 3D vector because meshes do support up to 4-dimensional vectors for that. But it's something that I'm not familiar with, so I can't answer for sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Amazing. Well, if that is all,
I think that is all.
Yes. Yes.
Sure thing. Yeah. Thank you all for joining, and I hope it was interesting and educational. And always I'm around to, answer any other questions. Yeah, I'll also drop the links so that you can take a look. One of those is actually something that Cyani Looks, if you know them from Twitter, recently shared, which was actually very relative to this talk, because they were recreating UVs for sprites in Unity, which is actually an issue because when the sprites are in a sprite map, a sprite atlas, then they don't have individual UVs. So they shared some ways where you can actually recreate them. So that's always cool.